Thank you so much to the China Institute for having us come in and talk about this timely topic today. My name is Charlie Vest. I'm an associate director at Rhodium Group, an independent research firm that does work on China and energy and climate. And I'm delighted today to be with such an esteemed group of experts on the Chinese economy and US-China relations to discuss what lies ahead for China and the world after the election. So I'm joined today by Bob McCooey, Vice Chairman and Head of International Listings at Nasdaq. Bob leads business development for new listings in Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. Dr. Henry Moore is the Chief Economist and Head of Market Strategy at Corebridge Financial, which is formerly AIG Life and Retirement. And he was AIG's Chief Economist between 2016 and 2022. Previously, Dr. Moore worked as a director and senior economist at Credit Suisse and a researcher at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And then last but not least, Pin Yi is the president of Wanxiang America Corporation, an automotive, clean energy, and venture investment firm he established in 1994, headquartered in Elgin, Illinois. He also served as vice chair of the China General Chamber of Commerce USA and is chairman of its Chicago chapter, and he is board director of the China Institute. Thank you again for being on this panel today. Henry, I wanted to start with you to sort of set the scene for where we are today, starting by asking you how the Chinese economy is doing right now. What are the challenges the economy is currently facing, and what are your impressions of the stimulus measures that were announced last week?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Charles. The latest GDP growth in China, the third quarter is 4.6%. That's one of the slowest pace of growth in recent years. It also falls short of the government growth target 5%. So by that benchmark as underperformance. So a lot of speakers already mentioned there's a few challenges Chinese economies currently facing. So you probably heard about and read about the 3D challenge that Chinese economy is facing. The first D is deflation, right? We just mentioned that 4.6% real GDP growth. If you look at nominal GDP growth, could be a little bit even slower because GDP deflator has been negative since the end of 2022. So, the Chinese economy does face some sort of deflation risk. The second D is the debt. So, by various measures, the debt to GDP level in China is rising close to 300% of GDP. You add all the different sectors together. That is not as high as Japan, but getting closer. So that's one of the things that the government tried to tackle. I will address your question whether the latest stimulus package is enough or not. It's designed to tackle part of the debt problem. Now the third D is demographics. Demographic, population size is declining, the labor force is declining. So the United Nations estimated by the end of this century, China could lose half of the population. So youth unemployment rate, that's folks between 16 and 24. The latest figure in September is very high, close to 19%. So that figure does not include kids in college. If you include them, it could be even higher. So that's a lot of challenge. So, Henry just mentioned decoupling. If you want, you can add another D and make it 4D, decoupling. So decoupling, I think is real. I know Henry cited many figures showing that the size of U.S. deficit did not change. Merely the composition changed. In the past, it may came more from China, now came less from China, but came more from the other emerging countries like Mexico, Vietnam. But we have to think about that. The more they move the production or the reshuffling of the global supply chain is the loss of Chinese GDP, loss of local job. Hence the problem, as I mentioned, the youth job rate is so high in China. So that's the 4D, right? So I mentioned the second one is debt. So last week, China introduced 10 trillion debt swap program, try to alleviate the debt burden for local governments. But that's 10 trillion, 6 trillion is spread 3 years, each year 2 trillion, and then the other 4 trillion is spread 5 years. So just take it on face value. The official figures suggest that the local government debt problem is close to 15 trillion. So 10 spread a few years probably is not big enough. And by IMF estimate, the local debt could be as high as 60 trillion. So that's a very high number. So if you
That's
look
higher
at
than the U.S.
the RMB, yeah. So if you look at the market reaction, probably is below the market expectation. So I think it's the right measure on the right direction. Probably the government has to do more. Yeah, let's stop here.
And just a quick follow-up on that. There were some expectations about consumer-facing stimulus, stuff to make households spend more. Was there anything in the stimulus that you saw as a signal of more to come there?
Yeah, that's another area that the market felt disappointed because not much on this front. I think there's a lot of academic and market commentary on that. In order for China to really move away this investment rate, you have to increase your consumption. One way to do that, you have to redistribute the wealth and income to more households and families. Yeah, that's one of the things really lacking behind market expectation. Yeah, thanks for adding this.
Yeah. Bob, I'd like to turn to you and ask, you've had a really unique lens looking at the sort of outbound role of Chinese capital going into global markets amid this slowdown. So I'd love to hear from you about what IPO activity for Chinese companies looks like right now, and are we seeing Chinese companies coming back to the U.S.? And then if you want to opine a little bit about how the election result affects some of that.
So I'd like to just follow up on what Henry just said. For those of you who have heard me in the past, excuse me, I don't want your ears to bleed, but I talk about entrepreneurship a lot. I think China is one of the great entrepreneurial countries of the world, and sometimes we in the U.S. Wrap ourselves in this idea of entrepreneurship and that entrepreneurs only exist in kind of Silicon Valley and Cambridge, Massachusetts. There are amazing entrepreneurs who have built fantastic businesses in China. We're blessed at Nasdaq to have 7 of the 8 largest Chinese companies listed in the U.S. markets, all listed with us, and many have been like Pinduoduo today, a Nasdaq 100 company. But one of the things I think, Henry, that is a little stifling, unfortunately, right now for the Chinese economy is the fact that the dream of becoming a Nasdaq listed company for the entrepreneur in China that light seems to be dimming over time. And if China could allow for some of these companies to get public more quickly, there's been a slow play by the CSRC starting in March of 2023 with new regulations that came in, and it's been very kind of painful and slow for companies to get public. There are other reasons why companies haven't gotten public, but one of them has been this new process that's been put in place. And I think that if we could get some stimulus back into China by those companies being able to raise capital, and by the way, I don't go to China, and I've been to China 135 times, but I don't go to China to convince a Chinese company not to list in the local market. I actually believe that most companies around the globe, and I run the international business for Nasdaq, belong in their local market. But there are a number of companies who are going to list outside of the local market every year, and we firmly believe that when that happens, that they should list on Nasdaq. And so we've been working with these companies, and when they bring that money back to build a new plant, to roll out a new technology, to build a new consumer product, that allows for the economy to continue to be stimulated and grow. And so we think I'm not an economist, so I don't know what kind of economics that is, but I know that stimulating the economy in that way. To your question on the capital markets, and I won't filibuster here. We'll talk about politics later. I won't filibuster here, but the markets actually from China are quietly very positive. So I'll ask you, how many companies do you think we listed so far this year from China, Henry?
I heard a lot.
How many?
I don't know,
How many?
20?
20?
Yeah.
No clue.
So we've listed 42. And that doesn't include 8 more by SPAC business combination, including Lotus, which is a Geely company. They have they listed at a $9 billion market cap. So we've had 50 new listings from China so far this year. Our number of listings from China is over 250. Last year we listed 50 companies also. So I would grant you that most of those companies are fairly small companies. We had WeRide 2 weeks ago. We had our first company listed initially and primarily on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, dual list on Nasdaq. Actually, the first company ever to list primarily on Hong Kong Stock Exchange and then do a dual listing in the U.S. Super High, which is the international business of Heidi Lau, listed on Nasdaq earlier this summer. So we're seeing a trend of Chinese companies coming back. And I think the real reason why there's been kind of a negative sentiment among a lot of people in the capital markets about Chinese IPOs in the U.S., because we've had a great run over 20 years of Chinese IPOs, is the fact that the U.S. markets haven't been receptive to U.S. companies over the past 2 years. So how do we expect it to be receptive to Chinese companies? U.S. companies had to lead. They weren't leading in 22, 23. They started again early in 24, the markets reopened, and now Chinese companies are coming back, and our pipeline continues to be very, very strong of Chinese companies that we expect to come and tap the U.S. capital markets.
In terms of market cap, I mean, there was a surge of new listings in probably 2017, 2016, 2018 era. Number of companies, overall market cap, sort of where are we compared to those days?
Hey, you can pick any kind of companies you want and find the winners and the losers. That's one of the great things I say about Nasdaq is we don't choose the winners and losers. We let the market choose the winners and the losers every single day. But I did the Pinduoduo IPO myself. That company listed at a $21 billion market cap. I think they topped out their market cap thus far. I can't say it can't go higher at $250 billion. They're 175 billion or so today. The market caps, I think, are similar to where they were back in those days. But I think the overall trend has been, as I think our earlier speakers talked about, negative on China. So investors pulled back from being exposed to China, especially in an election year. I think quietly a lot of investors have started earlier this year to reinvest in China. And listen, it's the second largest economy in the world. It's got massive companies that are going to continue to grow. So we fully expect that the private companies will come public in the U.S. from China, and that the public companies today will continue to do well. I'd say the final piece too is U.S. investors. Bob and I and Henry are old enough to say this. Coming out of the crash of 1987, the U.S. investor was told to have a diversified portfolio, 70-30, 70 long-term equities, 30% fixed income. Probably over the past decade, that coming out of the great financial crisis, the 90, 95, 10 or 5 in equities did really, really well. But those equities can't just be U.S. equities. You need to invest in Israel and Argentina and Singapore and China. And so you needed to have a diversified portfolio. And China will, as a still fast-growing economy, massive TAM for the companies, and great companies that are going to continue to grow. You need to have exposure to China if you're going to be a long-term investor who's going to have a good portfolio at the end of the day.
Pinya, I wanted to turn to you next and talk a little bit about sort of your experience as an entrepreneur here in the United States. You've founded and have run an American subsidiary of a Chinese company for over 30 years. Your company, works in sectors that are also now at the very center of debates around U.S.-China competition and industrial policy. So I'd love to hear, how are you seeing geopolitics now? This sort of it's not the fourth D, but that's the idea, affecting the industries where you now work.
Yeah, so obviously, investing in the United States 30 years ago is completely different from today. And I always say this, 30 years ago, investment from China is like a panda. So although today, to Rob, those companies probably still look like a panda, but in the reality, when we're facing the public, and I feel we're more like a skunk. The difference, however, is that, I still say this, and I agree with what Henry was talking about. No matter how difficult it is, and honestly, panda need a protection to survive. Skunk doesn't. And that there are a lot more skunking on this planet than the panda. So my point is that the business logic today still exists. That is the reason why I think, Rob, you're talking about, there's still so many companies are coming here for listing. Although the headwind is very, very, very strong. So today, to invest in the United States, to deal with the geopolitical issue, and also to really feel comfortable that allow you to keep engaged with the local community, it is a very different playbook. So I would say, one of the things we learned a lesson is that let's try to separate those legal issue from the political issue. So legally, any company, Chinese company, American company, company from Israel, from any other country, you have to follow the law, you have to obey the rule, you have to, be a corporate citizen. So that part, it's a lesson for all of us. On the other side, geopolitically, all those political issues, I would say, my best recommendations are always don't read the newspaper, don't look at the social media. And actually, in the United States, it's a democracy. If you are more than 50% liked, you can be the president of the United States. And so, all those, again, you can talk about discrimination, attacking, whatever. Those things, I'm from Chicago. Chicago is a windy city. I keep saying this. Those political wind is something, it's very difficult to manage. It's almost impossible. So the best to deal with this wind is just to ignore it. Otherwise, you're just going to get confused. You're going to get frustrated. And as I say, as long as you follow the rule, follow the law, and hire a more expensive lawyer, and hopefully you will be all right.
Can you share a little bit more about, because the rules are changing, right? And in particular for Chinese companies, in the automotive space, for instance, there have been new rules coming from the Commerce Department that restrict, certain components that come into sort of the next generation of cars, and very high tariffs on batteries coming from China. What are you seeing in the industries where you work, where that decoupling is taking place?
So one of the trends I've been saying, frankly speaking, how do we define Chinese company? And the Chinese company, does that mean owned by Chinese people, Chinese American, or Chinese corporation? So let me be honest, I do see a lot of trend that, and again, this is a global market. No matter we like it or hate it, just like Henry was talking about, China's exporting is not reducing. And I think, the administration probably is going to go to the next level to talk about pan-China region, right? So any importing from Mexico, from Vietnam, from Thailand, from China will be viewed the same because behind, they're all Chinese product. Mm-hmm. So as I say, skunk can survive. And that there's ways you can manage that. So the way today is that if you're talking about, we're going to face a very interesting political challenge, which is it's a racial discrimination. Can Chinese American own a company to be as an American company? And those situations are happening. On the second Chinese generation, third Chinese generation, you talk about the Pinduoduo and the others. And many of them are today U.S. citizens. They're not Chinese citizens. So I think we got all confused about labeling as a Chinese company. And I just don't believe the Chinese company definition today means anything anymore. It's just a matter, again, Henry talking about those are nationalism. Those are the animals, we cannot get them out of the cage. It's going to kill both country and kill both government. Unfortunately, that is what we're facing today.
Let me come back a little bit to the sort of Chinese economy before we talk about tariffs, because that's going to be a big part of the conversation, and talk a little bit more about, structurally speaking, where the Chinese economy is and what that means for global trade. So, first, Henry, I'll turn to you. That even in the Biden administration, concerns about manufacturing overcapacity have been some of the top economic concerns. Particularly that high investment and weak domestic consumption is going to lead China to try and export its way out of the slowdown, potentially at the expense of other countries. That view is bipartisan. Janet Yellen talked about it. Robert Lighthizer will certainly be talking about it. And so I'm curious for your perspective on that. I mean, is China facing a structural challenge in the way that it's organized in ways that are making it hard for it to trade with other countries?
Well, I think it's very hard to define what is oversupply. If what you produce has consumer to buy it, I'm not sure whether you can turn it as oversupply, right? So I mean, the way I think about, for example, Europe is imposing tariffs on EV imports from China. So yes, it's a way to protect domestic market. China did that when China first opened up its economy, imposed very high tariff on imported cars. I don't think that it is because China oversupplies. Most likely because Chinese these days they produce this car with higher quality and lower cost, so they have a lot of competitiveness. So I mean, the way to do it, I'm seeing the trend now. You just talk about perhaps they just set up factory in Europe, and then exactly the way how foreign car makers went to China back in 1980 or 1990.
Can I add on that?
Please.
This is the first time, at least in my experience, in the business world, we have a buyer say, you have to raise the price to sell to me. If you don't raise the price to sell to me, I'm going to penalize you. So not
the end buyer though.
The
friction.
It's
causing the friction in the market.
Yeah.
Which is not good economically.
Yeah. No, I'm just talking about the business logic, right? At least there's a force here to say, hey, sell me more expensively. And if you don't sell me more expensive, I'm going to have to penalize you. So that is a very strange phenomenon. But, it has a reality behind it. Fully understand where those governments come from. And I would agree with Henry, in the reality that, this reminds me many years ago, if you guys know Wenzhou, and the similar situation. Many other cities in China are complaining like a crazy, right? No matter how you do, what do, you cannot compete with the company come out of Wenzhou because they are just so damn competitive. That's it. So you can talk about to say, hey, there's a government subsidy or whatever, but in the reality is entrepreneurship. That's what we're facing. And I don't think there's a solution to that, honestly.
I think there's no doubt that, the ability for Chinese entrepreneurs to bring down prices, compete, particularly in the battery space, right, has been very, very well known. But, you look at, this isn't just an American perspective, right? We're seeing, major tariffs in the European Union on EV exports into those countries. And so I'm curious, is there any merit to the argument that, in a moment where, Chinese automaker margins have shrunk so much, it's such a competitive market there, there's a lot of supply certainly, that, for VW, which recently announced it's closing down 3 plants in Germany, that there is a legitimate concern on the part of, governments around the world to, maybe too much trade openness.
Yeah, so I'm from the industry, so at least I can say something. You are very correct. When you allow the market to compete in a way that is a completely free economy, then there is a process for the market by itself to settle down. So we are in that process today in China. There's 100 EV companies in China. You don't need 100 EV company. Clearly that is true. But believe it or not, there's a lot of American capital behind. And the Volkswagen is behind, the BMW is behind, everybody's behind those EVs. Now the question really becomes that, I mean, if our statement is that the government is behind those, who would the government put the money behind? Obviously, the state-owned company, right? SAIC, FAW, those are the fundamental, traditional, larger conglomerate owns the Chinese car market. But who are hurting the most? They are the one hurting the most. So before those EV companies, that BYDs and the Cherries and others, they got into the European market, they wipe it out. No, I shouldn't say wipe it out. They made SAIC miserable, right? So that is the competition. That is the brutal, bloody capitalism competition. And again, I don't necessarily say that's right or wrong, but my point is that if you're talking about this as a government, I just don't believe it.
Let's talk about tariffs. So Trump has talked about 60% tariffs on everything coming from China, 10 to 20% on goods coming from everywhere else. Is he going to do it, or is this all a ploy for a big deal? That's to any of you guys. Maybe Bob, we start with you.
It's for a deal. He's the art of the deal.
What does the deal look like?
I'm not smart enough to know what the deal looks like, but I think that what we've seen over the past couple of administrations, and we saw it in our business in terms of the potential impact of HFCAA when the PCAOB accounting issue, and when it came down, actually in that case China blinked, but one side who has the worst hand will end up blinking at the end of the day. And so it may not be across the board. I would say, depending upon what the industry is, what the tariffs are, et cetera, and who the president decides that he's going to go after and penalize with the tariffs, then we'll see which country and which industries blink. I think at the end of the day, too, I think to the other panelists' comments is this does hurt the U.S. consumer. I mean, we got to remember. Well, I won't say all of us, but most of us that aren't ordering from Taobao are ordering from Amazon. And if you're here in the U.S., you're ordering, these goods from Amazon, and you're used to like super low prices that are being delivered to you in like 4 hours now. I mean, I'm ordering stuff in the morning and getting it delivered that same night from Amazon. So I feel like I'm in China, right? I mean, you get that done if you're in Beijing. Today, I think U.S. consumers are used to these very low prices, and when they start to see prices go up, what's that called? Oh, inflation? I think that was a bad thing, right? That was what's been the bugaboo for the past 2 or 3 years, and been part of this entire election cycle is inflation. Isn't this going to cause? I don't know. I'm not an economist. Henry, isn't that going to cause inflation?
Okay, let's start from the market observation, right? So this election cycle, one of the remarkable things is that the betting market get it all right, the polling market get it all wrong. Okay, so money talks. Okay, so let's look at the inflation swap. That's an instrument to change future inflation. 1 year, 2 year inflation swap rose by about 40 to 45 basis points since the end of September, since the Trump trade started. So by different measure, if the Trump administration imposed the tariff that you mentioned about, so in a year, U.S. inflation would increase by anywhere between 70 to 90 basis points, right? So in other words, the financial market by now only plus in half the impact. So the financial market is saying that you are not going to see this a full stage of tariff increase. At best, it's going to be gradual and over time. So I happened to be in D.C. End of October. I listened to panel discussion that's by Scott Bastion. He's Trump's economic advisor and one of the topic for Treasury Secretary. So he's just talking about most likely we use this as bargaining chip to negotiate, and I will not exclude that. And they may impose some like 10-15% on some of the selected products up front. But in order to see the full impact, at least I'm not seeing this price in from the financial market instrument so far.
So, tariff can be as a tool or can be as a goal. And I think, in the Trump first administration, probably more as a tool than the goal. And if we remember Trump at the RNC convention in Milwaukee, in his speech, the only time he mentioned about China was the $50 billion trade agreement he signed with China. And he was complaining that that agreement was not executed as he was originally planned it. So clearly, there's still room for make this as a tool, which means it's for negotiation. And in fact, I think, Henry talked about this few different dimensions, business, national security, political competition, whatever. And the benefit between U.S.-China today is still, honestly, this is the business and the trade. So if the government can be smart on both sides, there's a room to negotiate and the room to reconcile. So will the administration impose the 60%? My belief is yes, they will. And will they do cross the board for all the product? It will depending on how both sides negotiate. And our hope definitely is that, you pick a specific segment with minimal impact to the U.S. consumer. I'm just talking about today on the USA side. For those products that can be sourced to other countries without too much impact to the U.S. consumer, that should be the focus today.
In terms of what Trump would be negotiating for, so he put 60% tariffs on with the goal of striking a deal with China. What does that deal look like? Is it another phase one sort of managed trade deal setting targets for purchases of energy, agriculture, and manufactured goods? Or has the time for that kind of deal passed?
Yeah, my belief is that Trump would like to see more companies come to Nasdaq.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So if you remember what he said during the election, right? He's keep emphasizing that we want you to come to the United States, to invest in the United States, to create a job in the United States, which, again, there's a way to compromise, and that could benefit. Frankly speaking, if you talk about geopolitical, I'm not sure this is helping China or hurting China. China today is much more influential in Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, because this tariff. But that's good, right? China has become much more globalized, and coming to the United States is great, So I think there's definitely, a room here for negotiation.
Yeah, it's the art of the deal, as I said earlier, but Trump's also the one who just throws the proverbial shot across the bow. Like he's gonna put the shot across the bow, and he may put some tariffs in place. He may do it in certain industries to start, and then threaten to expand them in order to get the negotiation started. But I doubt he's going to start with negotiation. I would expect that, as we've seen and reported in the press, that he'll be there in the afternoon of, I don't know, January 20th, and start signing away on documents to throw a couple of them out there immediately. It would be my guess. That's a personal opinion. It's not Nasdaq's opinion. It's not trading advice in any way.
Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, Charles, I think so. One thing, Trump, when he talk about tariffs, he keep using the word reciprocal. So I mean, if tariffs on both sides are about the same, I think that perhaps that's the end game here. Yeah.
Maybe last question for me, and then if we have time for maybe 2 questions, Susan, I'll leave it to you to decide. About Taiwan. So this is going to be an area of certain friction for the United States and China over the next 4 years. Major exercises took place this year, timed with Taiwan's National Day and the President Lai's inauguration. Trump has made statements in the past questioning the merits of defending Taiwan. Yeah, how concerned are you about further escalation in the Taiwan Strait? And what, if anything, are you seeing businesses do to prepare for contingencies?
Oh, me? Okay. Honestly, you know, if you look at what Elon Musk just said about, SpaceX, the supplier need to move out of Taiwan. So my reading from that, in fact, that is reflecting a lot of people in the business as well, is that the Taiwan issue is not going to resolve peacefully, but that does not mean there's going to be a war, okay? So the issue today here is that if this pressure is there and keep increasing, then I would be a lot more concerned if I was a Taiwanese, because all the business people want to have, they want to de-risk, and the Taiwan will become a very risky region. That means you're going to pull business out of there. So that is devastating to Taiwan. It doesn't need to be a military war. That will essentially force something happen. And I remember when the tariff started, many of our competitors went to Taiwan instead of Thailand and Vietnam because of language, because of culture, because of, a lot more convenient to set up a company in Taiwan. So now they are very regretting. They're thinking to pull those business out of Taiwan very quickly. And as I say, Elon Musk's public, request definitely gave a very strong signal that, I think it's going to be a bigger. So for company in China, it doesn't really matter that much. But, for the company on mainland China, and a company in Taiwan, I think, whoever does the business there is a big concern.
I would say I have no particular opinion on this. I have not heard from any companies that they're changing their stance, but I will encourage those of you who haven't read the book to read Chris Miller's book, Chip Wars. If you haven't, buy it. It's on Amazon. Buy it. It's a good read. Give it to your kids to read. It's like a must-read. I'm just saying. Like if there's 10 must-read books of the past decade, or maybe since 2000, Chip Wars should be on that list.
I think we had one question up here. I've been given to 11:10, and so we've got that much time for questions. But please, go ahead. Do we have a microphone to?
Use mine.
Oh, you're trying to give yours up.
Thank you. I wanted to just interject one other element in Trump's thinking, and that is he has this fixation with tariffs. He talks about them all the time. It's the most beautiful word in the English language. He says this repeatedly in almost every speech he gives. The other point he makes is that he wants to continue the earlier tariffs that he imposed in 2017 that would expire in 2025, that this is cutting taxes, and he wants to keep those tax cuts on. He doesn't want to eliminate those tax cuts. And his argument is that tariffs will pay for the tax cuts. This is, I think, one of the more dangerous elements in this debate. If he really, and I can't believe he thinks this, but he does, he thinks that higher tariffs will pay for any additional tax cuts he wants to provide to the American people, and the old tax cuts that he provided in 2017. So my worry is that he will look at tariffs not just as a trade vehicle, but as a revenue-producing vehicle to offset the otherwise much larger deficits that would occur as a result of his tax plans. To me, this is one of the troublesome things. We relied up to the Civil War. We didn't have an income tax before the Civil War. We did to pay for the war because it was so expensive. But his notion is you go back to the point, and he makes this point repeatedly, you go back to the time when the United States got all of its revenues from tariffs. Well, he won't do that. But once in a while he said, it'll pay for the whole thing. It'll pay for all the tax cuts. This, to me, is a worry.
And Mexico's going to pay for the wall, right?
Yeah. Mexico pay, well, this to me, first of all, the economics is incorrect. But second, if he links the tariff increase with the idea of avoiding a big debt increase, then it is going to put more pressure on him to keep the tariffs because they are revenue generating. And this is something I worry about. It's part of the equation that's built in to his mindset that we did not have in 2017.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on that. So a lot of, talking about tariff focus on like 60% and 20% across the board, right? So if we look back, Trump 1.0, his cabinet has different opinion. Rob Lighthizer, very hawkish. Steve Mnuchin, more business friendly. At the end of the day, all his cabinet members brought their proposal to his room, and he make his own judgment how to do it. And if you look back history, it's not always in line with what Rob Lighthizer proposed, for example. I think this time around probably may not be that much difference. So basically, Rob Lighthizer will probably continue very hawkish on that, but he has other team member coming from more business-friendly background, which probably could counterweigh a little bit the argument. So that's exactly what I cited, the financial market. If I need to choose anything, I choose the financial market. It's not pricing a full-fledged of trade war.
Although Marco Rubio probably is going to be on one side of the camp rather than the other. But with that, please join me in thanking this distinguished panel for the discussion today. Much more to come.